Coming up, climate change will be top of mind for tribal leaders from Midwest tribes at an upcoming gathering, and a future medical doctor wins a major fellowship. Plus, the nation's oldest Native sorority turns 28 this month. We'll hear from the Grand President. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We start in California, where the governor has enacted new legislation, all of which was championed by the only Native lawmaker in the state. Last week, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill package authored by Native Assemblymember James Ramos. There are 5 laws in total. They include an alert system for missing and murdered Natives, nation-to-nation training, name replacements, and education. The California Indian Education Act will require educators to work closely with tribes to develop Indigenous curriculum and classroom materials. This legislation was signed at a celebration of California Native American Day. Ramos spoke about Native people's strength and adaptability.
But also, let's not forget the resilience of our ancestors so that we can still be here today and sing these songs and celebrate in one accord on California Native American Day, which will be Friday. Right now, we're at Cal State San Bernardino teaching over 2,500 third and fourth graders all this week about who we truly are as California Indian people.
In his remarks, Newsom said the state is recommitting itself to empower Indigenous communities. Native people make up 1.9% of the population in Washington state, but when you look at the state's prison, that number rises to 5%. We go now to a story about a state penitentiary where Native people are doing their part to stay connected to culture. From the tiny tots to the golden age, dancers entered the arena. This year was the first time the Washington State Penitentiary held its annual powwow since 2019. The gathering is a major highlight of the year for the Native people who are incarcerated here. Joey Brooks, who is Lakota, said this was his 4th powwow at the medium security prison in Walla Walla. He says the powwow is a way to show his family that people in prison can change. Talon Salaskin hadn't seen his mother, Edith, in almost 10 years. That is until the powwow. She's not able to drive that well, the Yakima citizen said. This year, Talon had no intention of dancing. He just wanted to sit with his mom all day. Washington state officials first allowed powwows at state penitentiaries 50 years ago. It came with religious rights being protected by the Constitution and the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. But there are still many challenges to holding an event like this. This year, organizers say they were only able to allow children after a legal organization paid for extra security and all of the food. It was worth it for people like Jared Arrington, who is Quinault. Jared oversees the prison's medicine garden. He tends to the plants that are used for medicines and smudging. Back at the powwow, beaded medallions and painted drums lined the tables. They are gifts handmade by the prisoners for their friends and families. And by the end of the day, almost every attendee was gifted something to take home. The video from that story came from our friends at _news. In Brazil, indigenous people are taking to the streets to demand an end to the violence against Native people. Along with songs, indigenous activists demonstrated in São Paulo last week. They painted their bodies red to symbolize Native deaths. The groups are protesting against what they call a culture of impunity, which has led to dozens of deaths and illegal land grabs in the rainforest. Clashes have turned deadly between tribes and groups illegally invading protected land to exploit natural resources and displace Native people. A congressional candidate and indigenous leader spoke out.
We want to keep our people alive. We don't want martyrs. We don't want heroes in a frame. We want our people alive to keep fighting in defense of the environment, fighting in defense of the waters, fighting in defense of Mother Earth.
Activists say President Jair Bolsonaro has encouraged invasions, undermining federal agencies charged with protecting the rainforest. Well, indigenous leaders interested in running for office have the opportunity to hit the ground running. Advanced Native Political Leadership is hosting a virtual information session on its program called the Native Leadership Institute. Once applicants are accepted, they are offered tools and training about how to successfully run a campaign. Attendees are also taught about how to stay grounded in their cultural identity throughout the process. The session is open to Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiians, and it will take place virtually on Thursday, September 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You can find more information by going to Advanced Native Political Leadership's website. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. The prestigious Udall Fellowship is awarded to outstanding Native graduate students who are pursuing degrees in the healthcare field. Tammy Livermont was named this year's fellow, and she's actually received it before. Tammy is a citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation and is pursuing her MD at the University of Minnesota Medical School, where she joins us from now. Hi, Tammy. Congratulations to you.
Hi, Aaliyah. Thank you so much.
So let's just start off. When you found out you won the Udall Fellowship, what was your reaction?
I didn't really know how to react. It's such a prestigious fellowship, and I put a lot of time and effort into it. But knowing that there are so many deserving individuals, I was just so honored and surprised that I received it.
And you actually have experience winning this fellowship before. I understand it was the undergraduate fellowship, but tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Udall Foundation was originally established in honor of a couple of different congressmen who committed much of their political careers to advocating for tribal health, tribal policy, and they have the undergraduate scholarship, which I was awarded in undergrad, another prestigious award that I did not expect to receive. And this is really just a extension of that, really an award that they created for graduate students who are committed to supporting and uplifting health and wellness in Indian country through policy.
I want to actually talk more about policy because I understand you're very passionate about that. What particular areas of policy do you think are the most pressing for Indian country right now?
Yeah, I think when you look at Indian country, you often hear about health disparities, but really at the center of my work at this point is really about self-determination when it comes to healthcare in our communities. And for so long, the federal government has been running and delivering healthcare to our communities, and we know how to best care for our own people. So when it comes to policy, for me, it's about empowering and providing all tribal nations the tools and the things that they need to determine their own healthcare services in the best way, deliver the best services necessary to meet the needs of their communities.
You worked as a tribal liaison with the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board, and you actually got to work on COVID. So tell us about that experience.
I'm actually at the Oyate Health Center, which is the new tribally run clinic that the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board works at. But prior to going to med school, like you said, I was a tribal liaison, and it was an amazing and really life-altering experience. I took that role prior to graduating from my master's program, knowing that I wanted to come back and serve the tribes in the Great Plains area. And it was the second day of my of my day of my job that they declared COVID as a national emergency. And so it was boots on the ground immediately. And it was just an honor to work with tribal leaders, tribal public health professionals, and also really serve as a liaison between our tribal nations and state and federal partners to ensure that our tribes were allowed to exert their tribal sovereignty and also get resources to our communities.
You know, what strikes me, Tammy, is that it's not too often that you see Native people who are medical doctors, but they also work closely in policy. Can you kind of provide some context into why this kind of work is important?
Yeah, I originally went to college wanting to just be a doctor, and I was always dissatisfied with just making individual impact. And I think for policy, and the reason policy isn't important is because it's a tool to create systemic change. And for tribal nations, especially as sovereign tribal nations, we have policy as the tool to really enforce and uphold the sovereignty of our nations and push forward what that means and how that best works for us. So policy seems like a scary thing, but it's really the tool to make systemic change and make changes that impact entire communities and not just individuals.
We're actually going to see later today that the new director of the Indian Health Service is going to be formally sworn in. Just very quickly, what are your thoughts in terms of the greatest issue she'll have to face as she takes her office?
Yeah, I think the history of the Indian Health Service is not all positive, right? But I think we are on the way to creating a system that works best for tribal citizens and the people that it was meant to serve. So I think her biggest task is to really listen to tribes. IHS should respond to tribes and the needs of tribes, and bridging that gap, and IHS being an advocate for what tribes are asking for or need is really the greatest task for the IHS director to take on and uphold and fulfill.
Tammy, I have one last short question for you. How will you be, celebrating receiving your Udall Fellowship, and what will you do with your award money?
So I'm actually, like I said, in Rapid City right now. I don't know that I'm not celebrating much. Most of my work celebrating is spending time with my community and doing things that really impact them. So I'm actually using some of my funding to come back to my community and help establish a traditional healing clinic at our tribal clinic. So that's more work related. I'm sure I'll do something fun with my friends. But for the most part, it's using that funding to spend time in my community and do the things that re-energize me.
Well, Tammy, thank you so much. Alpha Pi Omega turns 28 years old this month. It is the oldest Indigenous sorority in the country and was founded at the University of North Carolina. Today, sorority members come from more than 130 tribes, and there are now 24 chapters nationwide. Joining us today to talk about Alpha Pi Omega is Mardella Sunshine Richardson, who is the Grand President of the sorority. Welcome, Mardella.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
So at a high level, tell our viewers who may be learning about this sorority for the first time what your mission is for your sorority.
So the mission of Alpha Pi Omega is to support Indigenous women, not just in college, but in professional aspects of their lives today. And we're really seeing that come to fruition over the past couple of years with the growth we've had within our the professional side of our organization.
We're going to get more into that, but I want to learn, for you on a personal level, why you joined the sorority and how it helped you while you were in college.
So that's such a beautiful thing. I'm an urban Indian. I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I went to North Carolina for college. It kind of felt like a fish out of water. for lack of a better term. And I joined to have a connection, to automatically have a network of people who I could relate to, who were going through the same struggles I was going through. And through meeting sisters across the country, it really has pushed my drive for being a part of our national board, to continue to allow this to grow for other women.
I understand when the sorority was first formed, the founders also reached out to Native elders in North Carolina. How did those elders encourage them to keep moving forward?
The elders served as a counsel for our founders, to be able to give them guidance on how to incorporate our traditions and to keep our community as a part of a Greek organization, because Greek organizations is not something that is familiar with our communities. It's really blazing the trail for the first time, as we have Indigenous students in a college setting where they are finding themselves the minority among the minorities, when they're coming from their communities where they were, in fact, the majority the entirety of their lives.
That's such a great point. I think when I went to college, I was surprised to find out that there's now a push for more diversity among sororities and fraternities. And to think that this happened 28 years ago seems so groundbreaking.
Yeah, and it seems like so long ago for some, but it really is not that long ago. I have a niece who just turned 28, and so for me, it is like that shift of how much you can achieve in one set of time, and just how much there is a need for support among Indigenous women, not just in college, but also, as we move into our professional careers.
Talking about moving into a professional career, how does the sorority help members after they graduate?
So it's really beautiful. A lot of times you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I was in a sorority." For our members, for our sisters, it's always that I am in a sorority. And over the past decade, we've been able to establish 6 professional chapters in urban areas. Most recently, we have a professional provisional chapter in Minneapolis, St. Paul, just providing, where there's large populations of Indigenous women, providing a place for them to gather and to just have support. And so it's really beautiful to see that happen, that maybe somebody who came into the organization as an undergrad, or now, they're a mother, they're an employee, they have so many different roles, but they're still provided the support they need to continue to fill up their cup as they pour into others.
Absolutely. I mean, Mardella, your own motto is my sister as myself. Tell us what that means to you.
Sure, that means that I'm going to continue to care for myself and my sister. I'm going to take up for her, I'm going to be there for her, and I'm going to really embrace her when she can't hold herself there. It's an ongoing thing, because it's kind of like our circles. It's a continuous reciprocity of giving and, being given to.
I want to talk about expansion of Alpha Pi Omega. Maybe tell us what college campuses it is currently located at and where you plan to expand in the future.
Oh, goodness. So we are literally coast from coast, from Dartmouth to the UNC system in North Carolina, down to Oklahoma. We go out to the Southwest with University of New Mexico, with ASU, to Washington State. We're at Oregon. So we are all over. We go where there is a need, where we're called to, quite literally. When Indigenous women reach out to us, we reach back out to them. And of course, we have to make sure that we go through the proper channels with their universities and follow regulations. So everything is quote unquote legal. But we go where we're called. And, we are very excited to continue that expansion process with establishing chapters in states where we have no chapters yet. So it's exciting.
Well, Mardella, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hurricanes, floods, and wildfires are symptoms of climate change. We watch the news and wonder what we can do on a personal level to make a difference. These are the questions that Midwestern tribal nations will tackle on October 17th. The Wisconsin Academy will host a gathering called Climate Fast Forward, and its goal is to focus on solutions to protecting homelands. Dylan Jennings is one of the presenters, and he joins us today. He's the Associate Director of the Sigurd Olson Environmental Institute and a recipient of the 40 Under 40 award given by the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. Welcome, Dylan.
Bonjour, thanks for having me.
So I want to jump right in here because you're leading a track called Traditional Perspectives on the Environment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, myself and Sarah Smith were another colleague of ours. Were asked to help to lead this track, which essentially would help to create just another network of like-minded individuals that need to get together from our tribal nations to talk about climate impacts, talk about our communities, and talk about a lot of these issues in common, but also share these types of hardships that a lot of our communities experience, and a lot of these initiatives we're launching with the general public to raise awareness and to create bridges and synergy.
What are some of the themes that you'll plan to talk to tribal leaders about? I mean, I imagine there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, so climate change mitigation is probably one of those topics, talking about how, what types of practices a lot of tribes are employing to basically address, the onset of climate impacts. But additionally, also looking at, preservation of specific beings and species that are very significant and just very important to our communities. And everything on down the line to how we address climate change in general.
I want to talk about your own community because you're from the Bad River Reservation in northern Wisconsin. What are you seeing in terms of climate change in your own homeland and community?
Yeah, so we have a relationship, rooted in reciprocity with the environment. We're inextricably connected to our environment and our surroundings. And because of that, the health of the environment directly correlates to the health of us as Anishinaabe, as Ojibwe people, as Indigenous communities in general. And so, a lot of our community harvesters and knowledge holders are seeing firsthand, some of the changes, whether that's the, extreme weather events that happen, to kind of sporadic seasons, lengths of seasons shortening or becoming longer in some respects. Noticing a lot of other types of impacts to the number of certain beings or species, and how those harvesting seasons essentially go. And so a lot of our harvesters see those firsthand. And therefore, because a lot of our communities are subsistence based, harvesting to feed our families, take care of our families, it also resonates that, our communities are just completely disproportionately impacted by climate change when compared to many other communities. And so in our community, especially, we had a major flood event back in, I think it was 2016 already, which took years to remediate a lot of the damage that happened as a result of that. And that's just one example.
We see so often in Ojibwe communities that wild rice is so important. I mean, if children can't grow up on the same types of diets, I imagine that that's a big issue for the next generation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the food systems, our traditional food systems, which you'll often hear are, great preventative health measure for, combating a lot of the sicknesses and diseases that our communities are also disproportionately affected and impacted by. Our traditional food systems are just invaluable in general. Manoomin is one of those, wild rice. It's one of our very important staples that we rely upon, depend upon in our communities. And it's also, extremely, it can be very delicate and vulnerable to things like climate change as well.
I have one last question for you, and that is, of course, is how you use, or I should say, how you entangle education and language preservation into these grander discussions of environmental protection.
Yeah, I think in general, are all those aspects you talk about are very, very interconnected. Sometimes in academia, there's this tendency to categorize and separate things, right? But in a lot of our communities, they're just known to be together. And so, our language, culture, and educating our communities and educating the broader community, in our regions about why these things are so important, how they're impacting our communities disproportionately and in different ways. I think that's very important. That'll be a big part of some of our discussions at Climate Fast Forward, is talking about how different communities, both rural and urban, are impacted by climate change and by the prevalence or the lack of some of these species beings due to climate change and impacts.
And you can find out more about the conference at wisconsinacademy.org/CFF. Dylan, thank you so much. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ICTnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.